Early winter settled quietly over Ravenwood Forest, the river calm and dark beneath a pale gray sky. It looked harmless, almost forgiving, but beneath that gentle surface drifted a terrible lie. Caught in the slow current was a police officer, bound and barely conscious, clinging to a massive truck tire, her strength fading with every turn of the water, one breath away from disappearing forever. And then, when hope should have ended, someone noticed what was never meant to be seen. A reclusive veteran and his German shepherd were walking the riverbank that morning, seeking silence, not salvation. One sharp splash broke the stillness. What they found, and what that loyal dog sensed before any human could, would ignite a chain of events no one in town was prepared for. A story of survival, betrayal from within, and a quiet fight for truth that would shake the very people sworn to protect it. If this opening touches your heart, tell us where you're watching from. Officer Emily Carter had learned early in her career that silence inside a police department could be louder than gunfire. At 29, she was already known as meticulous to the point of irritation, average height, lean and wiry from years of patrol work, with straight dark brown hair usually pulled into a no-nonsense low ponytail. Her skin held a pale olive tone that never seemed to tan, and her hazel eyes carried a sharp, restless focus, the kind that noticed what others dismissed as coincidence. Emily wasn't abrasive, but she was relentless, and that quality had cost her friendships, promotions, and sleep. She had joined the force believing rules were shields. Over time, she learned rules could also be curtains, hiding things no one wanted seen. The case began small, the way dangerous truths often did. A routine traffic stop involving an unregistered cargo truck, an evidence log that didn't match the impound record, a shipping manifest stamped approved by someone who had been on medical leave that week. Emily followed those inconsistencies with the patience of someone who grew up fixing broken radios with her father, learning that every problem had a signal buried inside the noise. She discovered connections between a local transport company, missing evidence files, and quiet orders from high above to let it go. When she tried to elevate her concerns, her reports were returned unsigned. When she asked questions in briefings, conversations ended. The station remained friendly enough, but the warmth had drained away, replaced by polite smiles and eyes that slid past her like she wasn't there. But another message pressed harder against her conscience. People were using the river, not just to move goods, but to erase them. The Ashfall River cut through Ravenwood Forest like a vein, wide and deceptively calm in winter, its current strong beneath a glassy surface. She had stood on its banks countless times during routine patrols, never imagining it could be weaponized. Now she suspected it had been, more than once. The order came late in the afternoon, a reassignment. Field support, the message said, thin on details, signed digitally by someone she hadn't spoken to directly in months. Emily hesitated, standing at her locker, fingers resting against the cool metal as her instincts whispered caution. But refusing an assignment without cause would mark her louder than any question ever had. She armed herself, zipped her jacket, and left the station just before dusk. The forest road narrowed quickly, asphalt giving way to packed dirt and fallen leaves. Emily drove alone, radio silent, headlights cutting through drifting fog. Her grip tightened on the steering wheel as the trees closed in, their bare branches clawing at the sky. She thought of turning back more than once. She thought of calling someone, anyone, but there was no one left she trusted enough to hear the truth without filtering it through fear or ambition. She never saw the vehicle behind her until its lights flooded her rearview mirror. The impact came fast. Metal screamed. Her head struck the window hard enough to blur the world into fractured light. Hands dragged her from the car before she could orient herself, rough and efficient, practiced. Someone pressed her face into the cold ground. The smell of damp earth filled her lungs. She tried to shout, but a knee found her back, forcing the air out of her chest. She caught fragments of sound boots, breath, a voice giving instructions without urgency. No anger, no hesitation. That scared her more than violence would have. When she came to again, the sky was gone. Emily's wrists burned. Her ankles ached. Rope bit into her skin, industrial grade, rough and unforgiving. She lay half submerged in freezing water, the shock jolting her fully awake. Panic surged, sharp and immediate, but training pulled her back from the edge. Control your breathing, assess, survive. She realized she was drifting, the current tugging her forward, pulling her away from the bank. Beneath her chest was rubber-thick, ridged, a massive truck tire, scarred and heavy, buoyant enough to keep her from sinking but not enough to bring comfort. The rope tethered her torso to it, crude knots biting into her jacket. The Ashfall River carried her like an unwanted secret. Emily struggled, muscles screaming as she twisted against the bindings. The water was colder than she expected, seeping through fabric, stealing heat from her bones. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably. Above her, the forest slid past in fragments tree trunks, overhanging branches, patches of gray sky. She tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by distance and water. Each breath came harder than the last. Her thoughts drifted to unfinished reports, to files hidden in her apartment, to the realization that someone believed she would never speak again. She understood then. This wasn't intimidation. It was execution, outsourced to the river. Time stretched. Her arms weakened. The tire bumped against submerged rocks, jolting her spine. Once she nearly lost her grip when the current spun her sideways. Only instinct kept her hands clenched in the rope. Emily thought of her mother's voice, of childhood winters spent near frozen lakes, of the rule she had learned too late: never assume danger will announce itself. As her strength waned, despair crept in, quiet and persuasive. The river didn't rage, it didn't threaten. It simply continued, patient and indifferent. Her eyelids grew heavy. Somewhere far away a branch snapped, a sound that didn't belong to the river. Emily forced her eyes open, squinting through water and fog. The shoreline came into view, distant but real. Her heart surged with a fragile hope that hurt almost as much as fear. She tried to lift her arm, to wave, but exhaustion dragged it back down. Darkness pressed in again, edges softening, the world narrowing to breath and pain. She did not see the man who would later pull her from the water. She did not hear the low, alert growl of the dog who would notice her before any human eye could. All Emily knew, as the current carried her deeper into Ravenwood Forest, was that she was not dead yet, and someone, somewhere, had made a terrible mistake. Morning came slowly to Ravenwood Forest, not with sunlight, but with a dull gray brightness that seeped through the fog like water through cloth. The air carried the metallic chill of early winter, cold enough to sting exposed skin, yet not sharp enough to freeze the ground. The Ashfall River flowed on, indifferent, its surface smooth and dark, hiding the violence it had carried only hours before. Luke Bennett walked its bank with the measured pace of a man who trusted the land more than people. At 44, he was tall without seeming imposing, his frame lean and corded rather than bulky, shaped by years of disciplined movement instead of gym-built muscle. His hair, once dark blonde, had faded unevenly to ash brown, kept short out of habit rather than style. A trimmed beard traced the hard lines of his jaw, softening features that might otherwise look severe. His face bore the quiet erosion of someone who had slept too many nights half awake, listening for dangers that never fully left him. Luke's eyes were a muted steel gray, steady and observant, but there was a guarded distance behind them, as if part of him was always braced for something to go wrong. He wore a heavy canvas jacket faded at the elbows, practical boots scarred from years of use, and gloves he rarely removed unless necessary. Luke did not come to the river for peace. He came because routine kept his mind from wandering into places he preferred not to visit. Since leaving the service, since the incident overseas that had ended his career and quietly reshaped his temperament, Luke had learned that stillness could be dangerous. Walking gave his thoughts somewhere to go. Beside him moved Shadow, a German shepherd nearing 7 years old, large even for his breed, with a thick sable and black coat that grew heavier every winter. His muzzle was darkened with early gray, but his posture remained disciplined, shoulders rolling smoothly with each step. One ear tipped slightly forward, the other bore a small notch near the edge, an old scar from a long-forgotten encounter that Luke never asked about. Shadow's amber-brown eyes missed little. He was calm by default, alert without nervousness, and intensely focused on Luke when not scanning the environment. He was not aggressive, but his presence discouraged curiosity. Shadow had learned long ago how to read Luke's silences, and Luke trusted the dog's instincts more than his own on days when memory pressed too close. They walked in companionable quiet until Shadow slowed, then stopped altogether. Luke noticed immediately. Shadow did not freeze for squirrels or birds. When he halted like this, something was wrong. Shadow's head lowered slightly, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air. His body angled toward the river, tail stiff but not raised, a sign of concern rather than excitement. A low sound rumbled in his chest, not a bark, not a growl, but something between restrained and uneasy. Luke followed his gaze. At first, he saw only debris gathered near the bend, branches tangled together, leaves matted into dark clumps, a pale smear of foam where the current curved. Then he noticed the rubber. A massive black arc lodged awkwardly against the bank, far too large to be natural driftwood. A truck tire, partially submerged, its treads slick with river algae. And tied to it, his breath caught, a human form. Luke broke into a run. He reached the water's edge and dropped to one knee, boots sinking into cold mud. The woman was barely conscious, her head slumped forward, dark hair plastered to her face and jacket. Rope bound her torso and arms, digging into swollen skin. Her lips were tinged blue, breath shallow and uneven. "Hey," Luke said, his voice low but firm, grounding himself as much as her. "You're not done yet." He moved quickly but not frantically, hands steady as he assessed the knots. The rope was thick, synthetic, frayed in places but strong industrial, not something someone grabbed in panic. Luke recognized it instantly. He'd seen similar rope securing cargo pallets, tying down equipment, meant to hold weight without slipping. This wasn't improvised. This was deliberate. Shadow waded into the shallows without hesitation, positioning himself close, body angled protectively as Luke cut through the rope with a small fixed-blade knife he carried habitually. The woman sagged forward when the tension released, and Luke caught her before she slipped back into the water. Her jacket was soaked, heavy, dragging her down. He dragged her free of the current inch by inch, muscles burning as the river resisted, until they were safely on the bank. Up close, she looked younger than Luke had expected. Late 20s, maybe? Her face was pale beneath the grime, freckled lightly across the bridge of her nose. There was a bruise forming along her temple, darkening fast, and rope burns circled her wrists and ankles in angry red bands. Her hands twitched weakly, fingers curling as if still gripping something that wasn't there. Luke shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over her shoulders, then checked her pulse. It was fast, thready, but present. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Shadow leaned in, sniffing her face, then settled beside her with his body pressed close, radiating warmth. "Good," Luke murmured, more to himself than the dog. "That's good." He tilted the woman's head gently to clear her airway. She coughed, a wet, ragged sound, and sucked in air like it hurt. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing hazel eyes dulled by exhaustion and shock. They focused on nothing, then on Luke's face. "Easy," he said. "You're safe. For now." Her gaze sharpened just a fraction, suspicion flickering even through pain. That told Luke more than anything else could. This wasn't someone who expected rescue. This was someone who expected another blow. She tried to speak. No sound came out. Luke stood, scanning the tree line. No footprints nearby except his own and Shadow's. No tire tracks leading down to the river. Whoever had done this hadn't lingered. They hadn't needed to. They'd expected the river to finish the job. Luke's jaw tightened. He had seen accidents, real ones, slips, misjudgments, bad luck. This wasn't any of those things. The placement of the rope, the choice of weight, the location along the river where the current would carry a body away from roads and trails, it was too clean, too intentional. Shadow shifted, ears flicking as if catching a distant sound. Luke listened, but the forest offered nothing beyond wind through bare branches and the quiet rush of water. Luke bent again, examining the tire more closely. It was massive, reinforced, the kind used on heavy transport vehicles. Its presence here made no sense. It hadn't washed in from upstream accidentally. Someone had chosen it because it floated reliably and could carry weight without sinking too fast. Someone had planned this. The woman stirred again, drawing a shallow breath. Her lips moved. "Police," she whispered, barely audible. Luke looked down at her sharply. She swallowed, eyes squeezing shut as pain rippled through her. "Officer," she managed. "Emily. Carter." Luke absorbed the name without reacting outwardly. He'd learned not to offer information too freely. "Luke," he said, "you're hypothermic. We need to move." Her eyes opened again, searching his face. "They thought I was dead." Luke didn't correct her. He didn't reassure her with false comfort. "They were wrong," he said simply. He helped her sit up slowly, bracing her weight against his shoulder. She winced but didn't protest. That stubbornness pushing through pain without complaint felt familiar. Luke had worn it himself once, before it cost him. As he lifted her, Emily's gaze drifted back toward the river, then the forest beyond, fear tightening her features. Luke followed that look and understood. She wasn't afraid of what had happened. She was afraid of what might come next. "They'll come back," she whispered. Luke adjusted his grip, steady and unyielding. "Then they'll have to look harder." Shadow rose immediately, positioning himself on Emily's other side, close enough that she could feel his warmth through her soaked uniform. His presence seemed to anchor her, her breathing slowing just slightly. Luke glanced once more at the river, at the tire bobbing uselessly against the bank now that its purpose had failed. He felt something old and unwelcome stir in his chest. A recognition. The shape of this situation, the calculated cruelty, the assumption that silence could be enforced through disappearance. He had walked away from that world once, believing isolation would keep him clear of it. He was wrong. With careful steps, Luke led Emily and Shadow away from the water, deeper into the trees, toward the narrow trail that would take them back to his cabin. Behind them, the Ashfall River continued on, carrying nothing now but the echo of a mistake someone hadn't planned for. Luke's cabin sat deep inside Ravenwood Forest, far enough from the river that the sound of moving water faded into a low memory rather than a constant presence. It was a single-story structure built from weather-darkened timber, shoulders hunched beneath a shallow metal roof scarred by old storms. The place looked abandoned to anyone passing by. No lights, no smoke, no sign of life. But everything about it was intentional. Luke had learned long ago that survival often depended on being underestimated. Inside, the air smelled faintly of pine resin, old coffee, and antiseptic. Luke eased Emily onto a narrow couch lined with thick wool blankets. Her uniform had been stripped away, replaced with dry thermal clothing he kept for emergencies, oversized on her thin frame. She shivered despite the heat from the small propane heater humming nearby, her body still fighting the river's cold. Shadow settled on the floor beside her, his large frame pressed against the couch, eyes fixed on her face with quiet vigilance. He did not sleep. He listened. Emily's breathing was steadier now, though each inhale came with effort. Her face had lost some of its ashen color, replaced by a pale flush that hinted at returning circulation. The bruise along her temple had darkened to a deep violet, stark against her light skin. She stared at the ceiling, jaw clenched, as if replaying something she could not turn off. "They won't stop," she said finally, her voice hoarse but controlled. "Not after this." Luke stood near the small table, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee. He didn't answer immediately. He had heard that certainty before, spoken by men who understood the cost of being found. "Who?" he asked. Emily swallowed. "I don't know exactly. But it wasn't just muscle. Someone ordered it, someone with authority." Luke nodded once. That matched what his instincts had already told him. "Rest," he said. "We'll talk when your head clears." She almost argued. Almost. Then her eyes flicked to Shadow, who met her gaze without blinking, and something in her posture softened. She closed her eyes, exhaustion finally winning. Luke moved quietly through the cabin, checking locks, adjusting the curtains so only thin lines of gray light filtered through. He powered on an old police scanner he kept more out of habit than interest. Static filled the room, broken occasionally by distant chatter from the town below. Nothing unusual. Yet. He was refilling the kettle when Shadow's ears lifted. Luke froze. Shadow's head turned toward the far wall, nose twitching, his body tensed, muscles coiling beneath thick fur. A low warning sound vibrated in his chest. Not loud, but deliberate. Luke followed his gaze to the corner near the door. On the floor, half hidden beneath a bench, lay a compact handheld radio black, scuffed, its antenna bent slightly at the tip. Luke frowned. He hadn't noticed it earlier. That bothered him. He crouched, lifted the radio carefully, and turned it on. A burst of static erupted, then a voice cut through, male, tight, impatient. "I don't care how you missed her. She's not dead. That's the problem." Luke's eyes hardened. The voice continued, distorted, but clear enough. "You fix it. Before dark." Emily stirred on the couch, eyes snapping open. She pushed herself up on one elbow, pain flashing across her face. "That's them," she whispered. "That's their frequency." Luke raised a finger for silence, turning the volume slightly higher. Another voice answered, rougher, edged with irritation. "Current strong. She shouldn't have made it." "She did," the first voice snapped, "which means you failed. I want it done today." Emily's breathing quickened. "They think I'm still in the river," she murmured, "or nearby." Luke shut the radio off. For a moment the cabin was silent except for the heater's hum and Shadow's slow breathing. Luke straightened, every line of his body alert now, the quiet woods suddenly transformed into a tactical map in his mind. "They're coming," Emily said, "for cleanup." Luke didn't deny it. He had already shifted into a familiar mental space, one he hadn't visited in years but never truly left. "Then we don't wait." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Luke said calmly, "we don't let them decide where this ends." He knelt beside her, meeting her eyes levelly. "You're hurt, but you're alive. That gives us leverage." Her gaze sharpened, something fierce pushing through the fatigue. "They won't expect resistance." "No," Luke agreed. "They'll expect fear." Shadow rose to his feet, tail low, ears forward, as if he understood the change in tone. Luke reached out and rested a hand briefly on the dog's broad neck. "We'll move before they adjust." They left the cabin less than 10 minutes later. Luke armed himself with minimal gear knife, flashlight, the radio, nothing that would slow him down. Emily insisted on coming despite the pain in her ribs, her movements stiff but determined. She borrowed a jacket from Luke, the sleeves too long, the shoulders hanging loose on her narrow frame. Her hair, now partially dry, fell in tangled waves around her face, making her look younger, more vulnerable than she felt. They moved through the forest along a narrow game trail Luke had memorized over years of walking. The light was already beginning to fade, the sky bruising toward dusk. Every snapped twig sounded louder now. Every gust of wind carried imagined footsteps. Luke led, Shadow slightly ahead, Emily between them. They reached an old logging spur where the trees thinned just enough to reveal tire ruts half swallowed by leaves. Luke crouched, examining the ground. Fresh tracks. Recent. Someone had driven in and out not long ago. "They're close," Emily whispered. Luke nodded. "And careless." A sudden crunch echoed from the trees to their left. Shadow reacted instantly, darting forward with a sharp bark that shattered the quiet. Luke lunged in the opposite direction, tackling a dark figure emerging from behind a fallen log. The man went down hard, breath knocked from his lungs. Emily staggered back as another figure stepped into view. Mason Cole was taller than Luke, built thick through the shoulders and chest, his movements confident and unhurried. He wore a dark jacket zipped high, gloves tucked into his belt. His head was shaved close, emphasizing the blunt angles of his skull and the scar running from his ear to his jaw, a pale line against weathered skin. His eyes were cold, assessing, the kind that measured people as obstacles rather than lives. Mason had learned that detachment early, after a childhood spent in and out of foster homes where violence was routine and trust a liability. By adulthood, he had perfected the art of following orders without asking why. "Should have stayed downriver," Mason said, voice flat. "Would have been easier." Emily recognized him instantly, not from a name, but from posture, from the way he carried himself like enforcement rather than criminal chaos. "You were there," she said. "In the car." Mason's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Didn't expect you to remember." Luke tightened his grip on the man beneath him, who groaned weakly, stunned but conscious. "Drop it," Luke said to Mason. "You're outnumbered." Mason's gaze flicked briefly to Shadow, who stood rigid a few feet away, teeth bared, eyes locked, then back to Luke. "Doesn't matter," he said. "I only need one of you quiet." He reached for his belt. Shadow moved first. The German Shepherd lunged with controlled force, knocking Mason off balance. Luke surged forward, slamming Mason into the dirt. The impact knocked the wind from him, but Mason fought back with practiced brutality, elbow driving toward Luke's ribs. Pain flared, sharp and familiar, but Luke didn't disengage. He twisted, pinned Mason's arm, and forced him down. Emily stood over them, breathing hard, one hand braced against a tree for balance. Her eyes were locked on Mason, fury and disbelief warring in her expression. "Who sent you?" she demanded. Mason laughed once, a short, humorless sound. "You already know." Luke yanked Mason's hands behind his back and secured them with the same rope Mason had brought to finish the job. As Luke stood, Mason's phone slipped from his jacket pocket and hit the ground, screen lighting up. It vibrated. Emily looked down. The name on the screen made her blood run cold. "Chief Robert Hale." The phone continued to vibrate between them, the call unanswered, insistent, as daylight bled out of the forest. Luke and Emily exchanged a single look. The hunt had just changed direction. Luke did not give Mason time to recover. The forest had a way of swallowing hesitation, and Luke had learned through blood and consequence that momentum was a weapon as real as any blade. He hauled Mason to his feet just long enough to shove him forward, then released him deliberately. Mason staggered, caught himself, and ran. That was exactly what Luke wanted. Shadow surged ahead without a command, moving low and fast, a dark shape threading through trunks and shadow. The plan wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. Luke would push. Shadow would pull the eye. Emily would watch the seams, the places where confidence split into fear. The forest ahead narrowed toward an abandoned timber spur, a remnant from decades earlier when logging trucks chewed through Ravenwood with more appetite than caution. The spur ended at a derelict way station and a long, roofless shed where cut logs once waited their turn. It was the kind of place men chose when they believed no one was listening. Mason ran toward it because he thought it offered cover. He was wrong. Luke slowed as they approached the clearing, scanning ground and wind. He smelled oil and cold iron, the faint residue of vehicles idled too long. Fresh boot prints crisscrossed the leaf litter. Mason hadn't come alone. Shadow's bark snapped sharp and sudden, echoing against the skeletal frame of the shed, then cut off as the dog veered hard left, crashing through brush to draw attention. A second figure burst from behind a stack of warped pallets. Trent Alvarez, shorter than Mason, stocky, with a bull neck and forearms roped with muscle. His hair was black and thick, shaved down to stubble. His face held the permanent squint of someone who'd learned to expect betrayal. Trent had been a bouncer once, fired after a bar fight ended with a patron in a coma. Since then, he'd taken work that paid better for fewer questions. He raised a handgun with hands that shook just enough to betray nerves he tried to drown with bravado. Luke moved before the shot. He cut right, low, and slammed his shoulder into Trent's center, driving him backward into the pallet stack. Wood cracked. The gun clattered away. Luke pinned Trent with a forearm across the throat, his face close enough to smell cheap cologne and old sweat. "Don't," Luke said, not loud. It was the kind of word that carried memory. Trent bucked once, then sagged, oxygen stolen, fight leaving him. Luke dragged him down and bound his wrists with a zip tie pulled from Trent's own pocket plastic, biting plastic, efficiency without cruelty. Across the clearing, Mason slowed, confused by Shadow's sudden disappearance. He turned, eyes flicking, calculating. Emily stepped into his path. She looked smaller than Mason expected. Slight, wrapped in Luke's jacket, hair loose and wind-tangled, but her stance was clean, balanced, the way it gets after years of training when fear learns its place behind purpose. Mason stopped short, breath fogging. "You should have stayed gone," he said, voice hardening to mask the slip of surprise. Emily didn't raise her hands. She didn't step back. "You left a radio," she said, "and you trusted the river." Mason's jaw tightened. He lunged. Emily met him halfway, closing distance before his reach could extend. Pain flared as his elbow clipped her ribs, but she stayed inside the arc, driving her forearm up beneath his chin, then pivoting to break his balance. Mason recovered fast, two fast hands catching her sleeve, momentum slamming them into the shed's rusted frame. The metal rang. Emily tasted copper and steadied herself on anger. She saw it then, the flicker of doubt in Mason's eyes. Not fear calculation failing. Shadow reappeared behind Mason in a blur of fur and teeth, snapping close enough to steal attention without committing. Mason twisted to fend him off. That was the opening. Emily drove her knee into Mason's thigh, felt muscle give, then hooked his arm and rolled, using his weight against him the way her instructor had drilled years ago when bruises were currency. Mason hit the ground hard. He tried to rise. Luke was there, boot planting between Mason's shoulders, pressure precise and final. "Enough," Luke said. Mason spat dirt, then went still. The clearing fell quiet except for Emily's ragged breathing and the ticking cool of wind through bare branches. Luke scanned once more, counting shadows. None moved. He knelt and checked Mason's pockets with practiced speed. Phone, keys, another zip tie. Luke secured Mason's wrists, then helped Emily back a step when her knees threatened to fold. Shadow pressed against her calf, steady as a wall. "Sit," Luke told her, not unkind. She did, back against a beam, eyes never leaving Mason. The man lay on his side now, chest heaving, pride bruised worse than flesh. Luke rose and took in the place. The shed's ribbed skeleton, the old weigh scale crusted with rust, the logging spur vanishing into trees like a scar. He felt the forest listening again, patient, impartial. Mason laughed once, a short bark. "You think this changes anything?" Emily wiped blood from her lip with the heel of her hand. "It changes tonight." Luke crouched, meeting Mason's gaze. "Who ordered it?" Mason looked away, jaw set, silence as tactic. Luke nodded, accepting the choice. He didn't need the answer. Not yet. He stood as Mason's phone vibrated against the dirt, screen flaring to life. The sound was small but insistent, a mechanical heartbeat cutting through the stillness. Emily leaned forward. The name filled the glass. Chief Robert Hale. The phone kept ringing. Luke didn't touch it. Emily didn't either. They looked at each other, the kind of look shared when two people understand that a line has been crossed and cannot be uncrossed. Mason's bravado drained, color fading beneath the grime. He swallowed, eyes darting. "Don't," he said, softer now. The phone rang again. Shadow sat, ears forward, head cocked, as if waiting for a command no one would give. The clearing seemed to hold its breath. Luke felt a familiar cold settle behind his eyes, not rage, not fear, but clarity. The hunt had brought them here, exactly where it needed to end for the next truth to begin. He reached down and slid the phone across the dirt toward Emily, stopping just short of her boot. "Answer it," Luke said. The ringing continued, unanswered. a promise and a threat vibrating between them as dusk finally took the forest. The phone kept vibrating on the dirt, a small, relentless sound that felt louder than gunfire in the hollow shell of the abandoned timber station. Dusk pressed in from all sides, the last light thinning into a bruised blue beneath the bare canopy. Luke didn't rush it. He had learned, in places far from this forest, that truth often surfaced when people believed time was on their side. He watched Mason's face instead. The man's bravado had evaporated, leaving behind a tight, brittle calm that couldn't hide the way his eyes kept flicking to the screen as if the name there could both save and condemn him. Emily crouched, steadying her breathing, ribs protesting with each movement. She reached for the phone, then paused, feeling the weight of the moment settle into her palms before she touched anything. The screen glowed bright against the dirt. The name was clean, formal, unmistakable. Chief Robert Hale, incoming call. She toggled the speaker and set the phone between them. The vibration stopped. The line connected. For a heartbeat, there was only the soft hiss of an open channel. Then a voice filled the clearing low, controlled, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Song Chua," the man asked, breath measured but urgent. "Bao la Tainan Trut Chun, Kom De Lai Do Vet." Emily's jaw tightened. Luke felt a familiar chill slide down his spine. Not fear, not anger, but recognition. He knew that tone. It belonged to men who gave orders from a distance and expected consequences to arrange themselves. Chief Robert Hale did not know he was being heard by anyone other than the man he had hired. He sounded like a man in his late 50s, baritone smoothed by years behind podiums and microphones, a voice that could soothe a town after a storm or close ranks after a scandal. Emily had seen him dozens of times before. Tall, broad-shouldered, hair silvered neatly at the temples, uniform pressed to an almost ceremonial crispness. Hale's face was square and dependable, a politician's jaw softened by a practiced smile. He shook hands firmly, laughed easily, and remembered names. People trusted him because he looked like the idea of safety they wanted to believe in. What they did not see was how control had settled into him over the years, not loudly but thoroughly, shaped by a career where compromise had been rewarded and silence had kept him powerful. Emily met Luke's eyes. No nods, no theatrics. The evidence was already speaking. Luke lifted his chin a fraction permission without instruction. Emily answered, keeping her voice low, careful to shape it with fatigue and obedience. "Yeah," she said, mimicking Mason's cadence. "It's done." On the line, Hale exhaled. The sound carried relief and something else impatience, giving way to certainty. "Good," he said. "I told you the river would take care of it." Emily felt heat rise behind her eyes. She swallowed it down. "Current was strong," she said. "Messy." "Messy is fine," Hale replied. "Dead is clean. You leave the tire where it is. No recovery. If anyone asks, she slipped while checking the bank. Happens." Luke's mouth hardened. Shadow, sensing the shift, settled closer to Emily's leg, his body a quiet brace. Emily kept her breathing steady. "What about the reports?" "Already handled," Hale said. "I'll have the narrative out by morning. A tragic accident. Commendations all around for the response." Emily closed her eyes for a half-second, letting the words brand themselves into memory. "And if someone talks?" Hale's voice cooled. "No one will. They never do." Silence stretched. The forest listened. Emily pressed a finger into the dirt to anchor herself. "Understood." "Call me if anything changes," Hale said. "And Mason, don't make me clean this twice." The line went dead. For a moment, no one moved. The weight of it, plain, unvarnished, settled over the clearing. Luke felt it in his chest, a pressure he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge in years. Orders given, lives dismissed, the easy lie of authority laid bare. He looked at Mason, whose shoulders had slumped now, the fight gone. The man stared at the ground as if it might open and swallow him whole. Emily reached out and ended the call, hands steady despite the tremor in her arms. She looked up at Luke. "That's him," she said quietly. "That's the order." Luke nodded once. "It's enough to start," he said. He bent and retrieved the phone, slipping it into an evidence bag pulled from his jacket, a habit that returned without ceremony. He photographed the call log, the timestamp, the contact details, his movements precise and economical. "We keep him talking," Luke added. Emily frowned. "He won't." "He already did," Luke replied. "Now we make him do it again." They moved Mason to a seated position against a beam, securing him fully. The man's hands shook. He had the look of someone realizing too late that loyalty had limits. "You don't understand," Mason muttered. "He'll bury you." Emily stepped close, her face level with his. The anger in her eyes was controlled now, sharpened into something steadier. He already tried. Shadow shifted, ears forward, eyes never leaving Mason's hands. Luke scanned the perimeter once more, then knelt. "Listen," he said to Mason, his voice even. "You've got two choices. You keep quiet, and you take the fall for a man who won't remember your name, or you help us put daylight on him." Mason laughed weakly. "You think daylight matters?" "It always does," Luke said. "Eventually." Emily crouched beside Luke, pain flaring and fading as she found her balance. She thought of the station, of the reports returned unsigned, of the friendly smiles that slid away when she pressed too hard. She thought of the river, patient and indifferent, and the tire chosen to end her without witnesses. "We don't go to local," she said. "We go around him." Luke met her gaze. "Federal." She nodded. "And we need more than a call." Luke glanced at the phone in his hand, then at Mason. "We get him to correct the lie." "How?" Emily asked. Luke's eyes flicked to the darkening sky. "We tell him there's a problem." They moved with purpose then, the plan assembling itself not as a speech but as a sequence of actions Luke had executed before in other forests, other nights. Emily steadied herself and took the phone again. Her voice had found its shape, calm, professional, obedient. She dialed back. The ring sounded twice. Hale answered quickly. "What now?" Emily let a hitch enter her voice. "There's debris," she said. "Someone's been asking around near the spur. If they pull the tire, they'll see the rope." On the other end, Hale was silent. When he spoke, the warmth was gone. "You told me to leave it." "I did," Emily said. "But the river didn't." Luke watched Mason as the words landed. The man's face drained further, the truth dawning that this was no longer cleanup, it was exposure. Hale's breath came audible now. "Listen carefully," he said. "You secure the area. You report an equipment malfunction, old logging junk. I'll make calls. No one pulls anything until I say." Emily nodded, though he couldn't see it. "Understood." "Good," Hale said, control reasserting itself. "I'll be there before full dark." The line clicked off. Emily lowered the phone. Her eyes met Luke's, a flash of something like disbelief breaking through the exhaustion. "He's coming," she said. "Then we finish this the right way." They didn't celebrate. They didn't speak more than necessary. Luke bound the phone and radio together, documenting each step. Emily forced herself to breathe through the pain and stand. Shadow pressed close, steady and warm. The forest darkened around them, not hostile, just watchful. Somewhere beyond the trees, a man who believed himself untouchable was on his way, convinced he could still arrange the story to his liking. Luke looked once more at the clearing, at the old shed that had swallowed secrets for decades. "We hold him to his words," he said. Emily nodded. "And we don't blink." They settled in to wait, the evidence alive and breathing between them, a call that should never have existed and now could not be unheard. Night settled fully over Ravenwood Forest, the kind of darkness that didn't rush but pressed in layer by layer, softening edges and sharpening sounds. Luke set the stage with the patience of a man who had once learned how to make time work for him instead of against him. He positioned Emily where the old way station's roofless ribs cast broken shadows across her face, enough to obscure details if someone glanced from a distance, but not enough to hide the truth from a microphone. Shadow lay 10 feet away, a dark, breathing anchor at the edge of the clearing, ears rotating with every whisper of wind. Mason and Trent were secured behind a beam, separated, watched, breathing hard in the cold. Luke checked the recorder twice, battery full, memory clear, then nodded to Emily. She lifted Mason's phone and pressed call. When the line connected, she let a tired tremor into her voice, the kind that came from obedience mixed with relief. "Dasu Lee, Ko Nai, Komkon Vende." On the other end, Chief Robert Hale released a breath he had been holding too long. The sound carried through the speaker, unguarded. "Good," he said, and the word landed like a lid closing. "That's what I needed to hear." Emily glanced at Luke, who angled the recorder closer without touching the phone. He understood this part. People confessed most when they believed the danger had passed. Hale continued, his tone loosening, confidence returning to its accustomed seat. "Here's how we finish it," he said. "You write it up as a slip on wet ground during a routine bank check. No pursuit, no third party. The river takes credit." Emily swallowed. "What about the tire?" "Logging debris," Hale replied immediately. "Old equipment. Happens all the time out there. If anyone asks, it's been there for years." Luke watched Mason's shoulders tense. The lie was being built piece by piece, careful and familiar. Emily pressed gently, like a finger testing a bruise. "And the injuries?" Hale didn't hesitate. "Post-incident trauma. Hypothermia does strange things. Medical will back it if the narrative's clean." Emily felt a flicker of anger threaten her control. She steadied herself by focusing on the cadence of Hale's speech, on the way power revealed itself when it believed it was safe. "Who signs off?" she asked. "Captain Morris," Hale said. "He owes me. If he's unavailable, I'll do it myself." Luke's eyes narrowed. Captain Daniel Morris was a name he knew from Emily's earlier fragments, a career officer with a stooped posture and thinning hair, a man who avoided conflict after a fatal mistake years earlier had cost a rookie his life. Morris had retreated into procedure ever since, hiding behind signatures and stamps, the kind of man Hale leaned on when he needed a door closed quietly. Emily nodded, though Hale couldn't see it. "Cameras near the spur?" Hale paused, then spoke slower, choosing words. "There's one county unit that catches the access road. I'll have it mark a fault window weather interference. File the ticket before midnight so it looks proactive." Luke felt the shape of the net take form. Names, times, instructions, each one fell into place with a dull certainty. Emily kept her voice even. "If someone already pulled the footage?" Hale's patience thinned. "They didn't," he said. "But if they did, it won't matter. We control the story." Silence followed, just long enough for Hale to realize he had said more than he needed to. He cleared his throat. "You did good," he added, warmth returning. "Go home." Emily closed her eyes for half a beat, then exhaled. "Copy." The call ended. Luke cut the recorder and immediately began cataloging. He photographed the call log, saved the audio to 2 separate devices, and labeled the files with time, location, and chain notes in a handwriting that had once filled after-action reports. He didn't celebrate. He didn't speak. He worked. Emily leaned back against the beam, knees weak, ribs burning, the weight of what she had just heard settling into her bones. Shadow rose and pressed his shoulder into her calf, solid and warm, grounding her. She ran a hand along his thick fur, felt the steady life beneath. Luke finally looked up. "We've got it," he said. "Is it enough?" Emily asked. "It's enough to move," Luke replied. "Not enough to finish." They didn't linger. Luke knew Hale's confidence would last only until doubt crept in, and doubt always came faster than expected. He split the evidence, one copy hidden in the cabin's false panel beneath the sink, another sealed and wrapped in oilcloth to go with him. Emily watched, absorbing the discipline of it, the way Luke treated proof like something fragile and alive. They moved Mason and Trent to a deeper pocket of trees where sound died quickly, keeping them out of sight but within earshot. Luke bound their ankles separately and positioned them so neither could see the other. He didn't threaten. He didn't bargain. He simply removed options. "Listen," Luke said quietly to Mason, crouching so their eyes were level. "Your boss thinks this is done. He's wrong. You help us verify what he just said, names, times, and you walk away with fewer years on your back." Mason's jaw flexed. Sweat beaded along his hairline despite the cold. "You think he won't crush me?" Luke's gaze was steady. "He already will," he said. "You're disposable. The call proved it." Mason looked away, breath shuddering. He didn't answer, but his silence shifted from defiance to calculation. Emily straightened, pain spiking and fading. She thought of the reports Hale planned to write, of the signatures Morris would provide, of the camera fault ticket filed before midnight. She imagined the town waking to a clean lie, one she would have been blamed for if she hadn't survived. The thought steadied her. "Next call," she said. Luke nodded. "We don't make it. He does." They waited until the forest quieted again, until the night's rhythm smoothed. Then Luke dialed, handed the phone to Mason, and stepped back. Shadow stood, silent, eyes fixed. Mason's voice shook as the line connected. "Chief," he said, "there's a snag." Hale answered immediately, suspicion edging his tone. "What kind of snag?" Mason swallowed. "The rope's visible. Someone might have seen it." Hale cursed under his breath. "I told you." Luke held up a finger. Emily started the recorder again. Hale's voice hardened. "Listen carefully. You do not improvise. You cut the rope, you sink it, and you leave. I'll make sure the report says the rest." Mason nodded frantically, though Hale couldn't see him. "And Morris?" "I'll call him," Hale said. "He'll sign, he always does." The line went dead. Luke ended the recording and exhaled for the first time in minutes. "That's confirmation," he said. "Pattern and intent." Emily felt a fierce, quiet satisfaction thread through the pain. He keeps talking because he thinks the danger's gone. Luke packed the devices, sealed them, and tucked them away. And because people like him mistake control for invincibility. They didn't move toward town. Not yet. Luke knew better than to walk straight into a house owned by the man they were exposing. Instead, he led them deeper into Ravenwood, toward a ridge where cell coverage dropped and the forest folded into itself. There, with the evidence secured and the lie still breathing on the other end of the line, they paused. Shadow settled beside Emily, chin on his paws, eyes bright. She looked down at him and managed a tired smile. "You knew," she whispered. The dog's tail thumped once. Luke checked his watch. "Midnight's coming," he said. "So is the fault ticket." Emily nodded. "Then we don't let him rewrite the night." They melted into the trees. The call that should never have existed now preserved in triplicate. A living record of a lie designed to erase her. The forest did not judge. It only kept what was given to it. Dawn never fully arrived in Ravenwood Forest. It seeped in reluctantly, thinning the darkness into a washed-out gray that made everything look exposed and unfinished. Luke preferred it that way. Full daylight invited certainty, and certainty made people careless. He moved with quiet efficiency, turning the cabin into a temporary command post without ceremony. The table filled with devices and paper phones wrapped in evidence sleeves, a handheld GPS, a battered laptop with its casing scratched down to bare metal. This was not technology he loved, but it was technology he trusted, because he knew how easily humans failed to erase their own footprints. Luke's fingers were steady as he pulled the call logs from Mason's phone, then Hale's number history mirrored from the synced cloud backup Mason hadn't even realized existed. Years ago, Luke had learned how signals behaved under pressure, how calls jumped towers, how metadata lingered like heat after a fire. His face remained impassive, but his eyes sharpened with focus, the same look he wore during night operations overseas when maps mattered more than bravado. He traced the pattern quietly. Late-night calls clustered around specific hours, repeated pings near the river bend, then near the logging spur. Not random, not sloppy, controlled. Emily sat opposite him, wrapped in a blanket, her ribs taped tight beneath borrowed clothes. Her face was drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes were alive now, tracking every detail. She worked through her own pile-printed report she had secretly forwarded to a private drive months earlier. Disciplinary memos returned unsigned, patrol logs edited with timestamps that no longer aligned. She compared handwriting with a meticulousness that came from years of being dismissed, the curve of a G, the pressure on a downstroke. Captain Morris's signature appeared where it shouldn't, identical every time, like a stamp of obedience. Emily felt anger surge, then settle into something colder. This was no longer personal. This was structural. Luke shifted the laptop so she could see the map. "Cell tower triangulation," he said. "Look at the overlap." Emily leaned in, wincing, then nodded. "Hale's phone was active when mine went dark." "Exactly," Luke replied. "He didn't order it blind, he monitored it." Shadow paced the room, nails clicking softly on wood, his broad head dipping occasionally toward the door as if checking the forest's pulse. The German shepherd's coat looked almost black in the low light, thick and bristled against the cold. He paused suddenly, nose lifting, then turned and padded back to Luke, sitting squarely at his side. Luke followed his gaze to the map again, to the southern edge where a thin line cut through the trees. "Old service road," Luke murmured. Shadow's tail thumped once. They moved quickly after that. Luke packed light evidence secured, devices powered down, routes chosen. Emily insisted on coming despite the pain. She had already been erased once. She refused to disappear again. Shadow led, nose low, moving with purpose through the brush as if following a remembered ghost. The service road emerged gradually, more suggestion than surface, its gravel long since swallowed by leaves. Shadow tracked along it, stopping at intervals, circling, then pressing forward. Luke recognized the pattern. This wasn't fresh. This was habit. Someone had used this route before, often enough to leave a residue of scent and disturbance that lingered beneath newer layers. The road led them to a clearing tucked behind a ridge, hidden from casual view. There stood a squat metal building with peeling paint and a sagging awning, an old logistics depot abandoned when the county rerouted contracts years earlier. The place smelled of oil and rust, of things stored too long and forgotten. Emily felt a jolt of recognition. She had seen this address once, buried in a shipping manifest that didn't match the rest. Luke circled the structure, careful, reading the ground. "Truck traffic," he said. "Heavy." Inside, the depot was a museum of neglect pallets stacked unevenly, chains coiled and rusted, paperwork scattered in drawers no one bothered to clear. Luke photographed everything before touching it. Emily moved to a desk in the back, drawers half open, and froze. There, beneath a layer of dust, lay a receipt bearing the serial number of a heavy-duty truck tire, the same model she had clung to in the river. The receipt was stamped approved, signed. She lifted it with shaking hands. "This is it." Luke came to her side, reading the name at the bottom. Hale's signature appeared again, faint but unmistakable. Not directly. No, he was smarter than that, but through authorization codes that only he could issue. Luke nodded once. "Origin point." Shadow barked softly, then trotted toward the far wall where a narrow door hung ajar. Beyond it lay a slope descending into thick brush. The scent intensified there: oil, rope, river water. Shadow followed it down, stopping at a shallow pit masked by leaves. Luke uncovered it carefully. Inside were frayed rope ends, scraps of plastic wrap, and a broken radio antenna identical to the one they'd found earlier. Emily closed her eyes. This is where they staged it. Luke straightened, scanning the tree line. and where they'll come back if they think they need to clean it. They didn't linger. Luke documented the site thoroughly, copying files, photographing serial numbers, sealing evidence. Emily photographed every altered report and cross-referenced them against timestamps now clearly impossible. The picture assembled itself without drama. Hale hadn't just ordered her death. He had engineered a system that allowed it logistics, authorization, silence. As they prepared to leave, a vehicle passed on the distant road, engine note low and familiar. Luke stiffened. He recognized the cadence. "County cruiser," he said quietly. Emily's pulse spiked. "He's moving." Luke nodded, which means he knows time's up. They retreated into the trees, Shadow leading them along a parallel route Luke had marked earlier. From the ridge, they watched as two figures entered the depot, one tall, broad-shouldered posture commanding even at a distance. Chief Robert Hale moved through the space like it belonged to him, hand gestures precise, voice carrying faintly. With him walked Captain Morris, shoulders hunched, hair thin and unkempt, eyes darting as if expecting judgment from the walls themselves. Morris looked older than his years, a man worn down by a single catastrophic mistake that had taught him the cost of resisting authority. Emily watched through binoculars, heart hammering. "There," she whispered, "together." Luke steadied her arm. "We have enough!" Hale pointed sharply at the desk, at the drawers. Morris nodded, pulling files, his movements frantic. Hale's confidence wavered only once, when he paused and glanced toward the trees, suspicion flickering. Shadow stilled beside Luke, muscles taut, ready. Luke clicked the camera one last time. "Chain complete," he said. Emily exhaled, a long breath that carried weeks of fear out with it. "He ordered it," she said softly. "He signed it. He came to erase it." Luke met her eyes. "And we caught him doing all three." They withdrew before being seen, melting back into Ravenwood's folds. The forest closed behind them, indifferent but thorough. In Luke's pack, evidence rested like a living thing, calls, logs, signatures, roots, threads Hale could never fully unravel. Emily felt something inside her finally align. The truth wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. But it endured. Morning broke clean and cold over Cedar Falls, the kind of winter morning that made everything look honest whether it deserved to be or not. Luke watched the town from the ridge road as the sun climbed, its light revealing rooftops, church steeples, and the glass front of the police station downtown. He had parked where habit told him to, half-hidden, half-ready Shadow, sitting in the passenger seat, chin lifted, amber eyes following movement below. Emily sat beside him, wrapped in a coat borrowed and mended, posture straighter than it had been in days. Pain still lived in her ribs, but something steadier had replaced the tremor in her hands. The evidence was no longer just theirs. They did not walk into the local station. They drove past it, past the familiar streets Emily once patrolled, and stopped instead at a federal field office housed in a converted brick building near the rail yard. The sign was modest. The security was not. Inside waited Special Agent Rebecca Lyons, a woman in her early 40s with sharp cheekbones and steel-gray eyes that missed little. She wore her dark hair in a tight bun streaked faintly with silver, a detail that matched her demeanor, controlled, seasoned, unromantic about justice. Lyons had come up through financial crimes and corruption cases. Years earlier, a whistleblower she'd protected had been found dead in what a county sheriff called an accident. Lyons had learned then to distrust tidy stories. She listened without interruption as Luke and Emily laid out the sequence, the calls, the logs, the routes, the signatures. When Emily finished, Lyons didn't ask how they'd gotten the evidence. She asked whether it was intact. "Redundant and sealed," Luke said. Lyons nodded once. "Good." By noon, warrants moved faster than rumors. Federal vehicles rolled quiet and purposeful through Cedar Falls, not sirens, not spectacle. Lyons coordinated with a small team she trusted, faces hard, movements efficient. Emily stayed back, per instruction, watching the station from across the street through a coffee shop window she knew well. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, older than yesterday, steadier than last week. Luke sat beside her, coffee untouched, shadow at his feet, a dark shape that drew curious glances, and then none. Inside the station, Chief Robert Hale was mid-briefing when the knock came. He stood as he always did, shoulders square, expression composed only. The faint tightening at his jaw betrayed him when he saw the badges that were not his. The agents moved with professional courtesy and unyielding purpose. They asked him to step away from the table. They asked for his phone. Hale complied, a politician's smile flickering on and off as he tried to shape the moment. It failed when Lyons read back timestamps, tower pings, authorization codes. It failed when the call log populated on the screen numbers he recognized too well, calls he had assumed would evaporate like breath in cold air. Hale protested. He invoked procedure. He invoked service. He invoked the town. None of it mattered. When they cuffed him, the room went quiet in the way it does when authority changes hands. Captain Morris stood near the door, pale, hands shaking. He did not resist when his turn came. Years of avoidance had brought him here, to a reckoning he could not stamp away. Emily didn't cheer. She didn't cry. She watched until the doors closed, until Hale was led past the flag he had stood under so many times, his phone bagged, its history intact. Something inside her loosened, not relief so much as alignment, the world making sense again in a narrow, necessary way. By late afternoon, the press gathered. Statements were issued carefully. The town buzzed with disbelief and a bruised kind of grief. Trust does not break loudly. It cracks, then splinters. Emily was called back to the station at dusk. Her badge waited in a small envelope on the desk of an interim commander whose hands shook as he passed it to her. He was a tall man with tired eyes and an honest slump to his shoulders, promoted not by ambition, but by vacuum. "I'm sorry," he said simply. It was enough. Emily clipped the badge to her belt and felt its familiar weight settle where it belonged. Outside, neighbors watched with the wary curiosity of people recalibrating their world. She nodded to a few she recognized, accepted a brief hug from an elderly woman who smelled of lavender and relief, and kept moving. Luke waited by the truck. He had done what he came to do. He did not linger where applause might follow. They drove back toward Ravenwood as night settled again, this time without urgency. The forest accepted them as it always had, indifferent to titles and outcomes. Luke parked near the river bend where it had all begun. The ashfall flowed dark and steady, reflecting a scatter of stars. Shadow leapt down first and padded to the water's edge, standing where the current slowed near the bank. He sniffed once, then sat, posture calm, as if marking a place that mattered. Emily joined him, breath clouding in the cold. She looked at the water and then at Luke. "I thought this would feel bigger," she said. Luke considered. "Light doesn't make noise," he replied. "It just shows things." They stood together, not touching, not separate, listening to the river. Emily thought of the tire, of the rope, of the calculated quiet that had nearly erased her. She thought of the calls that should never have existed and the small human errors that had saved her, the radio left behind, the metadata ignored, the assumption that silence could be engineered forever. Luke turned back toward the trees. "I'll walk you to the trailhead," he said. She smiled faintly. "You don't have to." "I know." At the edge of the clearing, they paused. Emily extended her hand. Luke took it, firm and brief, a gesture that needed no promise. "You're not hiding," she said. Luke shook his head once. "I'm choosing." Emily watched as he and Shadow moved back into the forest, the dog glancing once over his shoulder before disappearing among the trunks. She stood there until the sounds faded, then turned toward the road and the life waiting beyond it. Wiser, marked, unbroken. Downriver, the ashfall kept moving, carrying nothing now but reflections. Shadow's silhouette lingered on the bank for a moment longer, a quiet guardian at the place where a life had been spared and a lie undone, before following Luke home. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or blinding light. They come quietly, like a river that should have taken a life but didn't, like a man who thought he was done being useful, or a dog who refused to walk past suffering. Emily survived not because the world was kind, but because God placed help exactly where it was needed. A drifting tire, a reclusive veteran, a loyal German shepherd. Ordinary things, chosen at the right moment, became instruments of grace. In our own lives, we often feel like we're drifting too tired, unseen, convinced the current is stronger than our faith. But this story reminds us of a simple truth. When we hold on, even with our last strength, God is already moving people and moments into place. Help may come in forms we never expect, but it comes right on time. If this story touched your heart today, please share it with someone who might be fighting their own quiet battle. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We read everyone. And if you believe that no life is too small, no moment too dark, and no miracle too late, subscribe to this channel for more stories of hope, courage, and faith. May God bless you, protect your loved ones, and guide your steps. May He send you strength when you feel weak, light when you feel lost, and a guardian when you need one most. Amen.